my guest today is Dr. Adia Gooden, and I'll read out your bio so that I don't butcher it. So Dr. Adia Gooden is a licensed clinical psychologist. She received her BA in psychology from Stanford University and PhD in clinical community psychology. So I understand clinical community psychology from DePaul University. Dr. Adia served as a staff psychologist at the coordinator for multicultural outreach and support for the student counseling service at the University of Chicago, and the director of the clinic and community programs at the Family Institute at Northwestern before starting her own business. Dr. Adia is a sought-after dynamic speaker who gives talks on unconditional self-worth, imposter syndrome, and Black women and mental health. Dr. Adia gave a TEDx talk on cultivating unconditional self-worth, which has over 900,000 views. I just checked it, by the way, and has online courses designed to help people build healthy relationships with themselves and embrace their unconditional self-worth. So this official stuffy side, a little to the side, I want to say one more thing. You know, my acquaintance actually with my today's guest started with your TED Talk. I love TED Talks. I love the format. I love the quality because it is quality controlled. I love the guests. And I saw the talk and I wrote to my team, I want to interview her. So that's how I got you here on this stage. I'm so grateful that you actually came and you're willing to talk to me. And self-worth and relationship with yourself is definitely the topic that I'm very passionate about myself. And I want to start it with the quote, one of my favorite quotes, but at least the source of quote is super favorite, Oscar Wilde. I think he's super wise and also funny. So he says, love for yourself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. And with that quote as the inspiration, I want to ask you, since you actually work with people, you're in touch with people and with their pains and their insecurities, how would you estimate? And I know it's probably not fair because it's not a research-based answer probably, but how would you estimate how is our relationship with ourselves? How is our love for ourselves? Is it something which is actually natural and easy, or do most of us struggle with that?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Kristina. I'm really honored to be here talking with you today. So thank you. And I love this question about our love for ourselves and our relationship for ourselves. And from my perspective, I think that most of us struggle with our relationships with ourselves. I think there are certainly people out there who have healthy relationships with themselves, who love and care for themselves and respect themselves and honor their boundaries and all of those things. But I think that most of us struggle in that area. Many people engage in a lot of harsh self-criticism, feel a lot of shame, and experience a lot of blame for mistakes or failures or traumas that they've experienced. People struggle to prioritize themselves and take good care of themselves. And then when it comes to kind of feeling worthy and loving ourselves, so many people feel like they've got to change themselves. They've got to do something different or be different or look different in order to be worthy and lovable. And that can be this sort of ongoing pursuit of personal change in the service of trying to finally prove you're worthy. So I think it's really a struggle for a lot of people. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about talking about these topics of self-worth and then providing people with tools and strategies so that they can shift the way they see and treat themselves.
Because I also like to talk about self-love, some of the criticism that not criticism, but let's say some of the counter arguments that I hear may seem a little bit puzzling, as in like, I don't know how to answer, because a lot of the people think that there is a difference, I think, in self-worth, and the idea that if I am content with what I am, isn't that going to mean that I will not evolve? So probably one of the most extreme ideas that I heard was that self-criticism is healthy for your evolution, for your development, or even a level of self-hatred. That's literally what the guy said. And he actually referred to Stoics, and I get it, because Stoics are a little bit about that, and they're super respected nowadays. So how do you know How much self-worth is enough? Sorry, I asked this question and I realized it sounds so strange.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, to me, I see a grounding in our unconditional self-worth. And I think of unconditional self-worth as feeling that you deserve to be alive, to be loved and cared for, and to take up space, right? This sort of basic human things, what we feel babies are worthy of when they're born, that is still true for us as adults. And I actually see that as the best foundation for personal growth and evolution. It doesn't mean that you think you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you think you're better than everyone else and never to be improved. It means that you know at a base level you are worthy. And then from that space, instead of desperately searching to change or evolve ourselves and thinking, I'm awful, I'm horrible, I've got to change, we can say, well, you know, I'm worthy. And let me take a look at this pattern in my life that's producing things I don't like, or that's causing my relationships to go in ways that feel unhealthy. How do I look at this pattern? How do I change it and evolve it? Not from a place of I'm an awful human being, but from a place of I'd love my relationships to feel more connected, more healthy, more honest, whatever. And so how do I make those changes from that place? I would also like to distinguish between self-criticism, which I think tends to be pretty harsh and mean and judgmental, and self-reflection and self-assessment. So believing that you're worthy doesn't mean that you don't reflect on yourself, you don't reflect on your patterns and identify in a loving way, like, hey, you know, you keep doing this and it's a pattern that's causing, you know, problems in your life. And so how do we change this? That's how we respond to people we love. That's how we respond to children that we love, right? And so why is it that when it comes to ourselves, we think we have to be harsh and critical to grow and evolve, but that's not really how we treat children, partners, friends in our lives if we have healthy relationships with them and we're providing feedback.
You know, as you were talking, I just thought for a moment also about children that somehow, or even colleagues, when there is this idea that you have to criticize with love or with compassion or with some kind of something positive along with the parcel, otherwise you kind of shoot down the person. So yeah, it definitely resonates with me, but I do want to still ask, so people are afraid of getting stagnated if they focus too much on how worthy they are. Is there really that danger that if you think that you're so good and so self-worthy that you may actually stop evolving, or is it just an illusion that might happen?
So, you know, I think that it's important. So when I talk about self-worth, I really think about how we're relating to ourselves, right? How are we showing up for and with ourselves during good times, during hard times? And it's not about just affirmation of I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm so great, I'm so great, I'm so great, I'm so great. And I think that when people worry that they're going to stagnate, it's because they imagine believing in their self-worth means that they're just saying, they're staring in the mirror all day and saying, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're wonderful. And you may want to say that sometimes, but to me, the core of self-worth isn't about just affirmations or navel gazing or, you know, saying I'm the best. It's really about how do I go through life for and with myself? How do I offer myself encouragement? How do I encourage myself to grow and look at patterns in a way that works for me? And so I think that potentially distorted forms of self-worth and self-love that look a little bit more like self-indulgence and a little bit more like I'm just going to focus on myself could lead to unhealthy stagnation. But I think that if people are really, you know, looking at themselves, being kind to themselves, being gracious, and also tuning into their intuition and their values and figuring out how they want to show up in the world, that it doesn't become a place of stagnation.
Mm. I definitely want to talk to you about perfectionism a little later, because it all like I hear that idea coming through all the time. But first, I want to still dig this a little bit more, um, because it's just such an interesting it's such an interesting topic. Actually, as I was leading into the question, I forgot what I wanted to ask. So I'll talk about perfectionism first, and then I'll come back to that, because I know it was one of the facets of how to figure it out, and how to actually balance it, and how to be
Mhm.
how to keep evolving. But coming to perfectionist, because I know you had that thing as well, and we use the
Mhm.
word perfectionism, and I think women resonate with perfectionism maybe a little bit more, because we are actually expected to be perfect. I guess for men it expresses itself in something else. Maybe it's called a little different. Maybe even some form of competitiveness has this
Mm.
these element. But how do you live with the vision of perfect you? Like, yes, I know I'm
Mm.
imperfect. Yes, I know I want to evolve, but this is the picture. This is what I want to achieve. And my question now came back to me, because what I wanted to actually talk about is the negotiation between you and the vision of perfect you, the one which we always have.
Mm.
Because self-worth for me is also related to the idea that once I prove, then I will be, well, then I'll deserve the admiration and the
Mm.
title of worthy, and then I'll deserve my own love. So
Mm.
I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is how not to fall into that negotiation, that I will
Mhm.
only give it to me if I am worthy, if I prove myself worthy, if I do the right things, if I take care of myself properly, then I'll give myself the love that I deserve.
Mhm. Well, so the first thought that I have that comes to mind when you sort of talk about having a perfect vision of yourself is to challenge that idea, because the reality is that as long as you are living, you are never done. Right? Like, as long as you are still alive, your evolution is never over, right? We all go through transitions. We have new experiences. We have new insights. Our life goes, right? Like, you get married, you get divorced, you have a child, you grow up, you change a job, you lose a job, you go down a spiritual path, right? Like, there's so many evolutions. And so the idea that in this space and time, you would know enough to know what the perfect you looks like at some point in the future is just, I would like to just like, let's shake that up, right? Because you only know what you know now, but tomorrow and next month and next year, you may have an experience that really enlightens you. And so I really encourage people to think about the process, and as much as it sounds cliche, the journey, right? Because I hope that you're not done evolving at 40, right? I hope that if you live until 80 and you think you've reached the perfect you at 40, what are you going to do then? And I think there's some ways in which in Western society, in the US, we struggle with aging because there is this sort of ideal at this age, you look this way, you are this way. And then we don't see the value and the wisdom that comes with continued aging and evolution. And so then it just feels like a decline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I would just like to challenge the idea that we could have a perfect self that we're striving for. Now, I do think there are things where you might say, I want to show up for my relationships in this way. And at this point in my life, I see that showing up in this way feels like an optimally healthy way to show up. I want to show up for work in this way. I want to show up for taking care of my mental health and physical wellness in this way. And again, those are processes versus achievements. Like, instead of it being, I want to weigh this amount, it's, I want to work out this much to, strengthen, tone, whatever my body. I want to meditate this much to train and, strengthen my mental acuity and my focus, right? And so I really encourage people to have more process orientations instead of outcome achievement orientation. So that, I think, is the first piece. And I just think that sets you up for a life where you feel more fulfilled and less like you're chasing and waiting for life to start. Because that's the other piece you talked about, which is when I achieve this perfect thing, then I can love myself. Then I can receive love from other people, which means that you're really waiting. You're doing a lot of waiting. And then usually the way this works is, well, okay, I've got to get the degree. And then I got to get this certificate. And then I got to get this partnership. And then I've got to have this kid. And it just keeps changing and moving. So you never feel like you get there. And you always feel like you're not good enough. And so my challenge is, can you start treating yourself as you're worthy now? Right. And there's a difference between, taking good care of yourself, setting healthy boundaries, treating yourself with kindness and compassion, and indulging yourself. Yes, when you achieve a goal, indulge yourself, celebrate yourself. That's not something that you need to do every day, but you should treat yourself with some compassion every day, right? And tune into your body and what do you need and how do you show up for yourself and how do you navigate this challenge? So that's my encouragement, is to set up ways of being with yourself and being with life that are sustaining and fulfilling.
I'll shift this negotiation idea a little bit towards something maybe more achievable, because another example that I see sometimes is where I feel like, oh, I haven't done well today. For example, I was tired and maybe not as productive, or maybe I lashed out at someone, was unfair, and then okay, I will give myself self-love if I behave. So it's a little bit, I'm trying to untie it from the achievement, because achievement, yes, it's clear, you'll always have the next goal. But how about this haggling for love that we sometimes actually do with children as well? Like, oh, you behaved badly, mommy is not happy. We don't say I don't love you, but we imply that.
Yeah. So my suggestion that on those days, the best thing you could do is show up to yourself with compassion. And when I say self-compassion, that doesn't mean you say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you went off on somebody. It doesn't matter if you messed up something at work. It's saying, ooh, okay, this was a rough day, right? Like, tune in. How does this show up in your body? Okay, your chest is tight, your stomach is hurting, your head is hurting, your back is aching, you're clenching your jaw. Okay, can you breathe? Okay, can you breathe? Right? And then it says, okay, you're human, and humans make mistakes, and humans sometimes lash out at people, and it's not ideal, but it happened. And then you say, it's going to be okay, right? And then from that place, when you're soothed, right? Because really what that is doing is soothing your brain and your body. And it's actually getting your prefrontal cortex back online. Then you can say to yourself, okay, now what do I need to do to clean it up? How am I going to apologize, right? To this person that I said something that I really shouldn't have said that was hurtful. How am I going to apologize? What am I going to do to clean it up? Okay, I made this mistake at work. What do I need to do tomorrow to make it better? And it's so much easier. It's hard, but it's easier to go into, how do I fix it, from a place of acknowledging that this was a hard day, that you were not in the best headspace, and maybe even, forgiving yourself and saying, yeah, I didn't get enough sleep. This other thing was bothering me, and that's what contributed, like acknowledging it, versus what most people do after a hard day, which is, I'm sitting on the couch, I'm zoning out, I'm binge watching something, I'm scrolling, I'm just trying to numb myself. I'm eating, food that doesn't really actually nourish me, and I'm really trying to drown the feelings of shame and embarrassment and numb myself so I can ignore the fact that I messed up, because I feel so unworthy, because my mind is going, you're so awful. How could you say that to them? I can't believe you messed that up. And you're beating yourself up internally. And from that space is not a space where it is actually easy to take the steps you need to take to clean it up. right? And we all make messes and need to clean them up. So that's what I would suggest. It's not about sitting there and being like, you're perfect and you didn't do anything wrong, so no worries, like go and treat yourself to a fabulous meal, right? Like that's not what I mean, right? By self-worth. What I mean is saying, okay, this doesn't make you the worst human being in the world. In fact, you're human. Everybody does this. And yeah, that wasn't great, but okay, breathe through it. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And then how do we fix it? That to me is having a healthy relationship with yourself and affirming your worthiness that also helps you to grow and evolve and show up in the world and with other people in a way that's aligned with your values.
Mm. I really love how you're explaining it and giving the alternative scenarios, how sometimes we react, which is maybe natural. And I love this idea that it's not the same, like brushing it off is not quite what you need, because brushing off can pretty much feel like, oh, I'm being a jerk, actually, oh, it doesn't matter. As I was going to school today to pick up my daughter, I actually saw a kid fall down and then mom hugging the kid. And it was almost automatic, and it just triggered me thinking about, how we react to the situations, and how nice it is when you're still a small one, and there is some kind person to just acknowledge that it was painful. But it was also in a way like, the acknowledgement happened, and then they moved on and forgot about that. So what I want to talk about is this balance between actual relationship with yourself and those treats and hugs that we give ourselves to feel better. Because we may treat ourselves well and still not consider ourselves worthy of love or worthy of success or worthy of money. How do you strike the balance between the two? And is it necessary? Is you treating yourself well always a prerequisite to loving you? And I know I'm asking now a lot of questions. Or, for example, is if you don't treat yourself well for whatever reason, maybe you don't have time, you're overworked. Does that take away from you loving you? And how not to replace loving you with treating yourself, like in your example, like, yeah, it was a bad day, maybe I'll treat myself to a nice something. Sorry for a very huge question.
No, it's a really interesting question. I think so. The way that I often talk about self-worth and the self-worth journey is helping people to start treating themselves well. And when I say treat themselves well, I don't mean the like hashtag treat yourself necessarily, right? Like, I don't mean like, go buy the bag, go buy the shoes, go buy the car, right? But I mean the kindness. Somebody said in the chat, showing up as your best friend, right? As a best friend who's soothing you. And I think that's such a great description, right? So I think that one way to get into believing that you're worthy is through your behavior towards yourself, right? Because usually it doesn't work for us to just say, I believe I'm worthy. I believe I'm worthy. I believe I'm worthy. And then it just, does that. But if we start treating ourselves well, if we stop criticizing and judging and shaming ourselves, and we start, being kind and compassionate and caring towards ourselves, that usually shifts how we see and feel about ourselves. So I think that the belief is important, and I think the behavior leads to the belief. Now, when you say, can someone love themselves but treat themselves poorly, like part of what that makes me think about is, relationships where people say they love each other and then treat each other badly, right? And it's complicated, right? Because that happens in abusive relationships or toxic relationships where people say, I love you, and then their behavior is harmful. And I think in those circumstances, and that can be true for ourselves too, right? If you say you love yourself, but you never take care of yourself, you always put yourself down, you're judging and critical of yourself, and that makes you feel bad, to me, then the belief that you love yourself is less important than how you're treating yourself. Same as in a romantic relationship, right? Yeah. If somebody says they love you, but then they're being abusive, or they're, violating the boundaries of the relationship and making you feel awful, well, then their behavior is much more important than them saying that they love you. And so I think that sort of focusing on your behavior towards yourself and how it makes you feel is actually more valuable than the thought of like, I do love myself, or I do think I'm worthy. I think that that's sort of a secondary piece that should be more outcome based on the behavior that you're engaging in and how you're making yourself feel.
Mm. But you were right now, when you were talking about treating yourself well, you were actually talking about very profound way of treating, like, you know, are you criticizing yourself, or you know, how kind you are to yourself, right? How compassionate you are. You were not talking about, as you said, the hashtag treat yourself, as in go buy that bag or go for a massage. So that's an interesting thing that I noticed. It's a little bit on the fringe of the idea of self-love, but I think it's important because it just, what you were answering, it just triggered this thought. How can you know that you actually truly love yourself and it's not just an affirmation in your head? That there is, because the background to that question is that it's so easy to lie to yourself. You know, this is what is expected. You're supposed to love yourself, to treat yourself well, and that's what you tell yourself. But how do you know that it is true love and not just an affirmation?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm going to sort of connect this back to my last answer, which is look at the evidence in your life, right? Like, how's your life feeling and looking, right? Like, if you're saying, I really, really love myself, and yet you don't feel inspired, you don't feel engaged in work, you don't have relationships that are fulfilling, you don't feel healthy and mentally well, right? And your life feels stagnated, well, then I don't know, right? Because I actually think that we are major creators in our lives, right? That where the intent, the way life works isn't that everything just happens to us and we just have to wait for good things to come or bad things to come. And so I think if you look around your life and it's looking and feeling really good, then the likelihood that you do love yourself and you're creating a life that feels vibrant and makes you feel like you're thriving, which does not mean that everything's perfect. It doesn't mean that there are never challenges or losses or disappointments, but that in general, you feel like you're able to navigate those things well, and you feel good about your relationships and you feel good about yourself, right? Like that to me is the evidence of a life where you love yourself. If you are giving yourself these affirmations and you look around your life and you're in a lot of toxic relationships and you're not taking care of your mental and physical health, and you know, you hate your job and you hate all of these situations and you don't have good relationships, then that might be evidence that your self-love isn't going deep enough, because it isn't pushing you to start making shifts and changes. And I'm not saying that there aren't systems and forces outside of ourselves that impact us, because that's certainly true. But that I think when we truly love ourselves, we're going to be taking steps to craft our life and make sure that life feels the way we want it to feel. And it may not happen immediately, but we're moving, we're not stagnated and stuck. So that's really what I would say is look at the evidence in your world and in your life as a reflection of how you feel about yourself, how you're treating yourself, and how you're sort of engaging in life.
You know, I would like to go deeper in that conversation, but we can do it afterwards, because I'm thinking also, you know, if you tell yourself that I love yourself, you might just as well tell yourself that, oh no, my life is fine, right? So maybe self-honesty is something which I would like to touch upon if we get time. Meanwhile, I'll pass the microphone to Paula. Hi, Paula, welcome, and thank you for joining us. And I'm going to mute myself so that I don't add extra noise. So the floor is yours for a while.
Hi, Kristina, and hi, Dr. Adia. It's lovely to see and witness this conversation. It's really deep and it's touching a nerve inside all of us. My question was, what is the difference between self-worth and being selfish or perceived as selfish? I think one of the main drawbacks that I witness around myself and in myself is as soon as we try to do something for ourselves or that is in tune with what's true for us, if we come into clash with something that may be seen as selfish for someone else, we always kind of go for the external approval of what's right for us. And I find this is, for me personally, the biggest detriment in connections and relationships. We will go for how what I do is perceived outside versus what is really true. So how do we make that distinction? Where do we draw that line between I'm selfish versus no, I'm just being self-worthy?
So I think it's a really good question. I think in particular, I think most women are expected to be selfless and expected to put other people first. And this can look extreme, like you really shouldn't ever prioritize yourself, your needs over anyone else in your family, in the circle of people that you give for. And it can be really complicated. And so I think, being thoughtful about why am I deciding I need to set this boundary or do this thing for myself? Well, is it whenever I stay up late talking to this friend or family member about all their woes and problems, I never get enough sleep. And then I wake up the next morning, I'm so irritable, I'm so frustrated, and I can't do my job very well. And I'm irritated at my kids and blah, 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 right? Then saying, I can't talk to you past 10 p.m., right? I'm so happy to support you. This is not a time that works for me, right? It's going to sound selfish to that person. That's fine. But you're not setting the boundary because you're like, I don't like you and don't ever talk to me and I don't care for you. You're setting the boundary because you're like, this actually, it doesn't help me. It's not good for me. And it's also not good for my job and my family. And I need to set a boundary. And so some of it is needing to be willing to feel the discomfort of the other person being unhappy with you and maybe reacting. I always say that usually when you set boundaries, people throw tantrums, just like little kids, right? And just because somebody throws a tantrum, oh, you don't want to talk to me, you don't want to help me, blah, 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 whatever. That doesn't mean that the boundary is bad. And it may be selfish. It may be about you, but it doesn't mean it's mean. It doesn't mean it's wrong. And so there is a need to be willing to have other people be unhappy with us at times for the sake of taking care of ourselves. And that's not the same as like, oh, I'm going to steal your credit card and buy all this stuff for myself, like, in secret, because I want these bags, right? That's obviously a very different thing than saying, you know what, I am maxed out and I need the day for myself. And I need a personal day. So how do we arrange our family situation so that I can have a day away? And yes, it may feel like you're being selfish. And that may be true, but that's okay because it's going to restore you. It's going to be good for you. And ultimately, it's going to be in the service of the people that you love and care about because you can return and show up even better for and with them when you're feeling good.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that, Adia. It's just, I think you really hit me when you said you can be selfish and that's okay. It reminds you of the fact that it takes courage. That's why it's so hard. That's why we can't all do it. That's why we can't all be self-worthy, because it takes that courage of being disliked. You have the right not to like my choice. Nevertheless, I have the courage to do what's right for myself. So no, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
that's
Paula.
exactly it.
Thank you, Paula, for joining us. It's a great question and great reflection on that. So I enjoyed actually watching your conversation on the sidelines. But I do want to ask a little further off Paula's question, because I think it's very, very important. It's probably one of the crucial points why it's so hard to be to love yourself properly. And I know that you also talk about women's issues. And here's my feminist talking right now. And I know that setting boundaries, especially if you're a woman, is a little harder because there's one thing that people won't like you, but it's also considered more aggressive when it comes from a person who is supposed to nurture relationships. And also part of self-worth, I understand, is also in a way like tooting your as in, declaring that yes, you're worthy, even when you apply, for example, for a project or a position or whatever. And I understand that it's not as easy for women to self-promote as it is for men, for example. So is there any extra tip for us women how to not create too many enemies by being assertive and setting boundaries and actually tooting our own horn, or maybe ignore and let people hate you?
It's such a good question. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the challenge that women have often in these ways is very much grounded in history and in, experiencing sexism, because there's a history of women being punished when they assert themselves, of women being punished or torn down when they're succeeding highly and criticized. And we all want to be loved and accepted. And so it feels scary and vulnerable to set a boundary, to assert ourselves in a way that we sort of know may not be well received by everyone. And so I just want to acknowledge that. And I think that's the first piece, is just acknowledging that this does take courage, sort of like what Paula was saying, right? It takes courage to say, I'm going to acknowledge my strengths and gifts in this area and why I think I'm the right person for this role, right? And I would say that it's helpful to do that in a way that isn't so masculine oriented, because I think often the way that we see people toot their own horn or be confident is very sort of male centered and masculine. And I think that there are ways to do this that feel aligned, that don't look like I'm the best, I'm better than everybody else, blah, 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 but can look like, I've worked really hard to develop my skills in this area. And I feel confident that my experience is going to help me contribute to this project in a way that's going to move it forward. And I really love the opportunity to be able to take the lead on this project, right? And so that is not downplaying your strengths, but it's also not saying I'm better than everybody else. And so I encourage you to figure out, what is your authentic way of acknowledging and affirming yourself? What does that look like? What does that sound like in your voice? Often as women, we feel like we need to be like, well, maybe I might be able to take it because I might have had some potential experience in this, but I don't know, not really. And if anybody else wants it, then I'm not going to take it. Really, we do all of this because it feels more protective, because then nobody will call us out as saying, who do you think you are? Right? That's the fears, that somebody will say, who do you think you are to say I did this? And you can come with, as we say these days, receipts. Well, I've done a certificate in this, and I've had years of managing a project that was very similar and produced this many results and all of these things. And I really think that foundation of knowledge and wisdom is going to support me, blah, blah, blah. Right? And so you sort of give the information that allows you to serve and allows you to engage in that role. Okay, so then as I was answering that question, I lost the first part of the question. I know there was another part of the question.
I was asking, is there any suggestion boundaries for women, or do we just allow people to hate us?
Yeah, so okay, and then there was the boundaries part. So yeah. I think that one of the strengths that women often have, and it's, I think, gendered mostly because women are socialized more around relationships when they're growing up, is building relationships, right? And I have found in my career when I was working for organizations that the power of relationships really supports you when it's time to speak up and speak out, because people know you, people trust you, people see your work, and they like you, hopefully, right? And that really supports you when it's time to put yourself forward or call something out. And so I would lean on that power of knowing how to build relationships in and out of meetings, collegial connections, because that's going to support you. So that's one thing. The other thing is, be thoughtful about how and when you're setting boundaries. Talk to people about it. Talk to colleagues. If you're not sure, if you're saying, I have this person who calls me on Saturday morning, every morning, and I don't work on Saturdays, and I need to set a boundary. Talk to people, talk through it, and say, how do I set this boundary in a respectful way, right? That honors both my time and space, but also communicates what I need to communicate. So don't feel like you have to do this alone. You may have to talk to the person alone, but I think you can get some support, some consultation, some feedback. And then we're going to rely on courage. We're going to offer ourselves so much self-compassion and know that, yeah, people may not love that you're setting a boundary because you're basically saying no to something they want. And that's okay, right? But you're protecting your own mental and emotional peace. And it's really important.
Thank you so much. I realize that we don't have enough time actually to go deep into things with you, and I would love to talk with you about actually about a very feminine topic about how to survive in the masculine world, but that will be probably a discussion for some other interview. Meanwhile, we have Pooja here as a guest, and I do want to give you a chance to ask your question, although that will be the last question for sure because we are running out of time. Hey Pooja, I'm passing the microphone to you.
Hi, so good to be here. This is my first time asking a live question, so that's exciting, and it's on self-worth. And that was my most recent affirmation, because I read in this manifestation thing that we cannot achieve anything more than we feel worthy or deserving of. So I thought that was powerful. And we as women are ingrained, just as a society, be happy with what you have. Don't strive for too much. You already have so much. Or even when you make an ask at home or work, okay, I asked one thing, maybe if I ask these 5 more things, that'll be too much to ask. And we're always holding ourselves a little back. If you ask this one thing, you're should I hold off to ask more? You don't always feel worthy saying, okay, these are my 10 needs, and just, how to best go about approaching that and feeling you're worthy of everything you want and just asking for it, I guess, up front. So thank you. But I love the discussion so far. Very insightful questions and answers. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pooja. I do think it's useful to, I think it is useful to remember that we are in relationship and that sometimes there's a difference between what we're worthy of and what we can ask other people for, right? And so I think grounding our sense of worthiness and what we can do for ourselves is the primary priority. And then we have to navigate if we have to ask somebody else to do something for us or shift something for us, then we are in the realm of relationships. And we do have to sort of navigate the fact that, if somebody came to any of us and had 10 things that they needed right away, most of us would be like, okay, hold on, which doesn't mean that you're not worthy of it, but it may mean that in a relational context and based on the dynamic, you don't say, I need these 10 things right now. Now, can you ask those 10 things of yourself? To go to bed on time, to exercise, to drink water, to be kind and compassionate? Yes, you can ask those 10 things of yourself, but how you ask them and when you ask them of other people is going to, in some ways, depend on the dynamic. Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you don't ask or you hold off on asking or you're thoughtful about how and when you ask, that it doesn't mean you're not worthy of it. It means that you're thinking about how to navigate those needs in a relational context so that you can maintain the relationship as you'd like to maintain it.
Okay, yeah, that's thoughtful, because work, I feel like you want this project or this promotion and this, but you don't want to go to your boss with okay, I think I need, and just, I guess, timing it and being mindful of dynamics too. But yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja, for your question and for joining us, and congratulations on your first experience. Hope it won't be the last one. So unfortunately, we have to be winding up because we do have a busy stage traditionally, but and I'm going to ask you a question, but meanwhile, I want to traditionally, if you guys have not been at my honest conversations for a while, you don't know, but traditionally I want to ask you to leave a heart for my wonderful guests in the chat or in the comments below if you're watching it in recording afterwards. And while you guys are leaving hearts, I want to ask Adia that if people want to learn more and work with you more, because you're very profound, and obviously self-worth is not the only topic you can talk about. It is so clear that how can they get to know you more, get to know your work more? And yes, we can talk about self-worth specifically, but I feel there's so much we could talk about and go into so many areas. It's almost irritating that we don't have that time.
I agree. This has been such a rich conversation. So I'm so happy. And thank you all for the lovely hearts in the chat. So I would say visiting my website, dradiagooden.com. I have a free ebook that provides 4 practices that will get you started on your self-worth journey. I know some people ask questions about how do you start this self-worth journey. And so I think that link is going to be shared in the chat. So that you can sign up for that free ebook. I think I could also share it because I have the link still live. So you can sign up for that free ebook. I also have a podcast called Unconditionally Worthy. You can find it on my website, as well as Apple, Spotify, Google, all of the podcast platforms. So if you're interested in sort of how do we listen, how do I talk about self-worth and the intersection with a lot of other topics, my podcast is a really great way to start and listen to that. And then I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Adia Gooden. I'd love to hear from you. You could DM me if you have follow-up questions, and I'd love to stay connected that way.
And on TED as well. That's where I found you. And
yes.
Thank you so much. Yes, the time has passed way too fast. And maybe if you are up to that, we could find some time to talk about one of my other favorite topics. I actually have a lot of favorite topics, but I also like to talk about us women surviving in this world. And maybe we could find this conversation also interesting. So guys, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Bianca, for being our guardian angel and in the background, unfortunately. And thank you, Adia, once again. It was a pleasure to talk to you again, and I hope we get to continue this conversation in one shape or another. It was a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.